Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thanks for joining us today. So we have Ayya Soma tonight, who will be sharing some words of Dhamma after some meditation. So welcome so far to Elaine and Cow's our friend, as well as other viewers who are online. And so without further ado, I'll turn things over to Ayya Soma for tonight's meditation and Dhamma talk.
Right. Thank you, Mountain, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening or this morning if you are on the other side of the planet. So we can start by finding a comfortable seated position. Perhaps rocking the body side to side. Making sure the back is nice and straight. And when we feel that we found a reasonably comfortable position, we can close our eyes and take a few deep breaths. Relaxing any point of tension that we might find in the body. And relax our forehead, our face, our jaw. Relax the neck, the shoulders, the chest. Relax the belly, the arms, the legs and feet. Relax the entire body. From the top of the head to the tip of the toes. You can dwell peacefully and relaxed like this for a few moments. Enjoying this element of tranquility in the body and in the mind. And we can gently bring our attention to the breath, perhaps narrowing down the focus to the tip of the nose if it's helpful. Watching peacefully every in breath and out breath. Looking at the sensations that the act of breathing produces. Looking carefully at the quality of the breath, if the breath is smooth, calm, short, coarse. We're just present with the experience of breathing without judging it, without wanting it to be different. Just acknowledging it and seeing it for what it is. If the mind gets distracted, starts planning, thinking about the past or the future, we can gently tell ourselves, not right now, and bring our focus back to the breath. Watching the breath like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Gently open your eyes and come out of meditation. Stretch your body if you need to.
So thank you, Ayya Soma, for guiding us in some meditation. And welcome to a couple new friends joining us. Denise Guzman again. Good evening. Good to see you. As well as CAKM. And good evening as well to some more viewers who have joined in. Oh, hello, Robin. Oh, yes, it's Canute. That's what I thought. So good to see everyone. So at this time, I'll pass things over to Ayya Soma, who will share some words of Dhamma.
All right, thank you, Bhakti Sumanam. So we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. So tonight's topic is alone
At home.
Alone at home.
No, wait, at home.
Oh, at home. Alone. Something along those lines. What is the title?
At home with yourself.
Oh, at home with yourself. Which for whatever reason my mind thought that it had to be about being alone. Probably because we are spending so much time at home with ourselves these days. It's interesting because right before the pandemic, we moved to West Orange in this big monastery from New York City. And New York City is always, real estate is very expensive. So living by oneself was very expensive and kind of prime real estate sort of situation. But the pandemic kind of flipped everything. What used to be great to be alone with yourself, at home with yourself, for the topic of tonight, became the misery of being alone with ourselves after the pandemic. So a lot of different people that I know, both actually non-practitioners and practitioners, have been struggling quite a lot since the pandemic started. And now that we're getting into the second wave, or we're already in the second wave, third wave, fourth wave, I'm not quite sure which wave it is. It seems like this ocean, right, of so many endless ocean of waves. There's a lot of time to be by ourselves, and this can be quite challenging. Quite challenging for so many different reasons. But why is it challenging for us practitioners? Why is it challenging for us who have spent before the pandemic, spent so much time going on retreats, or perhaps spent so much time aspiring to go on retreat and wishing to be by ourselves? So it's very interesting questions. Here at the monastery, we knew that the pandemic started because we have access to news, but in reality, the day-to-day of the monastery hasn't really shifted much. There was this, I think it was a meme that Venerable Akaliko from Australia shared with us at the beginning of COVID-19, where it was quite funny because it was like the moment when you realize that your day-to-day life is basically always like being in a pandemic. And it was referred to as monastics because we're fundamentally always in shutdown, always in always kind of social distancing. Also, actually in Buddhism, especially, we never, like, really shake hands. We always do Anjali, safe distance apart. Um, when we sneeze in the meditation hall, we sneeze like this. So it's all like we kind of like been practicing for this sort of state of being. But what I wanted to talk about tonight, because for whatever reason I thought I was alone with myself. I found a few suttas right before the talk where the Buddha shares a few words in different occasions about being the importance of delighting in solitude, and how sometimes when we struggle to be alone, there is actually a reason. It's not something that is necessarily particularly specific to this circumstance, but it's just that in this circumstance, during a pandemic, in this day and age, we have more the opportunity to actually see it closely. We don't have any opportunity to escape fundamentally from ourselves. Even before 2020, I had many friends who, at a certain point, they were not happy with their career, and they started traveling and going from one place to the other, taking a sort of gap year that sometimes became gap years, gap decade, really going from place to place, searching, as they said, for themselves. And what they were finding was definitely a lot of different sort of external conditions, different, perhaps great conditions. I have this friend who visited pretty much every country in South America, had incredibly different experiences. Yet, the sort of dissatisfaction, whatever she was experiencing in New York City, in her job, was kind of never going away. It was this bag that she was bringing everywhere, but she didn't know how to put down. And so we had this conversation a while back where she was realizing how, in We're the Other, you can't ever escape yourself, and that she had to go through an entire, part of the continent to kind of come to that realization. And sometimes all of these kind of stories or phrases kind of sound like platitudes, right? Like, at least before I got into spiritual practice, when I used to work in fashion, so since it's kind of can be very alienating, there's lots of people who at a certain point leave and start going through these explorations or trips, soul searching, whatever one wants to call them. And I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. Whatever, yeah, finding yourself, whatever that means, it can be a bit of a platitude. But when actually we have no chance, no choice, we can't really escape anywhere physically, we can't distract ourselves, whether it's in a different country, whether it's, in a different neighborhood or in a different bar or in different anywhere, meeting new people. Whenever all of these opportunities are entirely removed from ourselves, and how many, shows and movies and whatever it is can we watch on Netflix before it grows old? When we have these conditions that seem very dire, unhappy, we are actually having a great opportunity to really look at the First Noble Truth, to really see suffering, to really understand what the hell it is that we're dealing with. And so exploring what is, the problem, root problem of being alone. And in Anguttara Nikaya 668, first of all, the Buddha highlights one thing that is very interesting, very important. And fundamentally, he says that he says, it is impossible that someone who delights in company, who is delighted with company, who is devoted to delight in company, who delights in a group, who is delighted with a group, who is devoted to delight in a group, just in case we didn't get it the first time. He says, will find delight in solitude when they are alone. Very simple. We're like, oh, why is it so difficult to be alone right now? Well, it's not that right now it's it's difficult. It's just that fundamentally we haven't created the conditions in the past to be able to delight in solitude, and that's because we've been delighting in company. So constantly searching for stimulus, for inputs, cultivating all these this need for talking, exchanging, being surrounded by people. And then he proceeds by saying, it is impossible that one who does not find delight in solitude when they're alone will acquire the object of the mind. So fundamentally, by not creating the conditions of delighting in solitude, it's very difficult to then create the conditions for developing concentration and insight. And then the Buddha proceeds that it is impossible for one who does not acquire the object of the mind will fulfill right view. So from there, very difficult to understand right view, which is the first component of the Noble Eightfold Path. And then the Buddha proceeds from there, impossible to fulfill right concentration and to abandon all the fetters, and from then to attain Nibbana. So we're fast forwarding all the way to the end of the path. And it's interesting because, we perhaps started the beginning of the pandemic going, oh, okay, maybe you've been actually following. We were also here at the monastery offering different retreats where you're like, okay, actually, this is a great opportunity to attain Nibbana right here, right now. But then after like 5 minutes, you're like, so much dukkha, so much difficulty. And and this is a great opportunity to actually see, oh, well, it's not that there's anything wrong with me. It's not that there's anything wrong with the circumstances per se, but rather it's just that in the past I haven't put the right seeds in the ground. So now, even though I'm watering and there's the fertilizer or whatever, I haven't really put the seeds in, haven't cultivated, created the conditions for this to come, and that's okay. Now we know what to work on. What a relief. That's great. A bit of delusion that has been swept away, and we can actually see what is that needs to be done. And in the same sutta, actually, the Buddha, pretty much flips the conditions and says that whenever we kind of we stop delighting in company, so we stop fixating the mind with, oh, I wished I could go to that restaurant with those friends. Oh, I wished I could I don't know, go to the opera. I wished I could fill in the gaps, whatever. I don't even remember what I used to do as a layperson in New York City, but I used to do a lot of things. I used to delight in company a lot. But, all of those things, without the longing, etc. So if we stop all of that and we actually go, oh, we're creating actually the conditions to delight then in being okay with ourselves, being okay alone in our home. Our new title of the talks tonight. Alone with ourselves, at home with ourselves. But it's also very important. The Buddha shares in another sutta in Samyutta Nikaya 21:10, when he's talking with this bhikkhu called Elder. And bhikkhu Elder was a monk who was known to be always spending all his entire time alone. So he would meditate alone, go on alms rounds alone, just be constantly alone, 24/7. So everybody was, praising Bhikkhu Elder for having developed this incredible quality of being alone. And he starts talking to the Buddha. Actually, the Buddha approaches him or something like that, and he starts talking to the Buddha. And the Buddha hears all of these things, and the bhikkhu says, yes, this is why, I'm doing great practice because I am dwelling alone. And the Buddha says, well, that's one way, I guess, to be alone. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. But then he says, actually, what is supreme is not just physically dwelling alone, but actually fulfilling being alone in detail. And he says, how, Elder, is dwelling alone fulfilled in detail? Here, Elder, what lies in the past has been abandoned. What lies in the future has been relinquished. And desire and lust for present forms of individual existence has been thoroughly removed. It is in such a way, Elder, that dwelling alone is fulfilled in detail. And I find these words so powerful, so beautiful, so piercing, that veil of delusion. Sometimes we tend to think that that's the only thing that we need to do, is lock ourselves up and just not see anyone ever again. Possibly a nice cave in Asia, so we don't even have there's no heating that breaks, no plumber to call, no electrician, or in Jamaica maybe. It's great. Haven't been to Jamaica yet, but I've heard the weather conditions is great. People are so great, so it's kind of a win-win situation. So sometimes I dream that I can go with my Jamaican friends alone in the middle of nowhere in an empty hut. But is that actually being alone once again? Is that really delighting in solitude? Well, the Buddha once again pierces that little bubble and goes, actually, that's not, once again, really transcending suffering. Being alone is not in and of itself the goal, but rather it's a means to an end. So actually fulfilling the path is severing all ties with this constant wandering in the past and the future, as well as craving in the present for any experience that we might have. So we can see how actually, even though we think we've been alone, perhaps, a lot of time during this pandemic. Actually, we've been in a lot of company. We've had the company of all our greed, hatred, and delusion, all our defilements going back and forth. We've been to all the restaurants in Manhattan, if you live in Manhattan, or if you live in Thailand, also. You've been also to all the monasteries in the world. It's great, isn't it? Well, it's great, but it's also dukkha. So even though the mind has this incredible potential of creating every different sort of realm of existence, experiential realm of existence, and also very important to remember that the sixth way to experience the world is actually through the mind. Sensual pleasure comes from the mind. So even though we have this capacity, there is still dukkha. And that's because sukha fundamentally is also dukkha. So even though actually we haven't had so much as we've had these in these past months, it's never enough. And I want to end with once again the words of the Buddha in Samyutta Nikaya 2:18, where the Buddha is talking to the Deva Kakuda, who asks the Buddha, "How are you untroubled? How is no delight found in you? How come when you sit all alone, discontent doesn't spread over you?" I love this Deva. Very human, very, very relatable. It's like my mom always asks me those things. My mom is a bit like the Deva Kakuda. I haven't told her yet that we're about to enter a 2-month silent retreat, because she already finds it extremely dreadful that that I don't leave the monastery, like I don't see people, whether it's a pandemic or not. ah, so she's very much, when you sit alone, you're not depressed? She asks me a lot of those things. When you're meditating all the time, sitting, not talking to people, it's dreadful. How are you not upset? She's like, I'm upset just by seeing people. You're upset now by not doing. How did you get upset with that? And the Buddha replies, delight comes to one who is miserable, misery to one filled with delight. As a bhikkhu, undelighted, untroubled, that's how you should know me, friend. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So I think I'll end with the words of the Buddha, because they are unmatchable and very straight to the point. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the live chat, and I'll try my best to answer them.
Well, thank you, Ayya Soma, for sharing those meaningful words of Dhamma with us. And welcome to some new friends joining in. So hello, Miguel, Alec, and Binaural Dean. And yeah, once again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the live chat. Binaural Dean asked a somewhat unrelated question. I don't know if you want to hear it just for posterity. How does the process work for a monk to get their Dharma name?
Your preceptor usually picks it for you. So very easy. Very straightforward. It's a little surprise. So in my case, actually, my name was given to me by Venerable Panyavati, but was actually, who was my Samaneri preceptor, but was actually picked by Bhante Sudasa, who is my Bhikkhuni preceptor. So that's where I get my name, Soma.
And Shadow of Label asks, Ayya, how does one deal with depression with a light? With the light?
Depression with the
light.
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 Depression with the light.
The light.
Oh, the light, maybe, not
Maybe.
the light.
I think ask for clarification.
Yeah, maybe it would be great if you could clarify. Maybe you're saying delighting in depression, which
Maybe.
could be interesting. But if you can clarify, that would be great. So then we don't start, imagination.
Speculation.
Yeah, speculation, the thicket of views. Yes.
I forget what they said yes to.
Delight.
It still doesn't make sense to me, though. What does
Delight.
one do depression with delight?
Because you were saying solitude with delight.
No, I don't remember. Oh, delighting in solitude,
Yes.
but delighting in depression. I don't understand her
His
question.
interpretation to it.
Oh, because you're equating solitude with depression? Is that? I'm asking you the question.
So, Shadow of Label, if you could rewrite the question entirely,
He said, yeah.
even if you say yes, unfortunately, we can't keep track of the yes that you're pointing to.
Especially because English is not my first language, so I tend to say some things that are not quite literal. So you have to understand more the meaning of what I'm trying to say rather than focusing on my choice of words. Because then you say yes, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Here at the monastery, they're used to. Sometimes I say words that to me sound similar, but they actually mean the entire opposite. Have an entire opposite meaning, so it's kind of fun.
So, Shadow of Label said, how does one deal with solitude on delight?
Solitude on delight.
I think they're both people with language barriers.
That's possible.
Oh, that maybe we're both ESL, so I don't understand you and you don't understand me. It's great.
But he's going with your words on delighting in solitude.
So maybe how does one deal with depression that arises even if one's trying to delight in solitude?
Okay, so how to deal with depression? Well, once again, we're talking about the first noble truth here. So whenever something unpleasant starts happening in our experience, and we're Buddhist practitioners, we're like, oh, I know the solution. Yeah, I know the cause, I know the solution. So let me start working on the solution. But actually, what we're doing is overlooking the first noble truth. We're overlooking the work that actually the first noble truth entails. It's not just like, oh, there is suffering, that's it, and we go back to it. But we need to understand what suffering is. So what exactly, for example, what does it feel like physically? So not what does it feel like in terms of what is the mind producing in terms of thoughts and ideas, longing, self-hatred, or what that. So not engaging with the visuals of XYZ person in my life said this, or I had this XYZ experience, or indulging in whatever kind of emotional state that we're in. So fueling it. But rather just at the very beginning, looking at it, no different than the breath. So when we're doing breath meditation, at the very beginning actually of my practice, it was impossible for me to focus on the breath. It was too subtle. There was way too many emotions happening in the mind for me to be able to sit still with something so quote unquote insignificant. That's how I perceived it, as the breath or as the body. So then I was like, well, instead of forcing myself to be with this object, actually there's a lot of other objects that are interesting to me right now, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. Most of the time they were unpleasant, actually, which is why my mind was gravitating towards them. And so I replaced the breath with whatever I was experiencing there. So if I was experiencing anxiety, I was just watching. How does it feel like in the body? So what kind of contractions do you feel in the body? It's constantly changing, by the way. So you also get to do not only to develop concentration, but also insight. 2 in 1. It's great. So yeah, noticing how it shifts, the quality of it, looking at it like you're watching TV fundamentally. So as much as possible, a third person perspective, and looking at it, understanding it, watching it. And then seeing at a certain point, you can see the cause of the suffering, which is desire. So we know it intellectually. But then we see that fundamentally what happens, for example, when we're feeling anxious or when we're feeling sad, we want for this experience to go away. So we try so hard, so hard, so desperately to make it go away, which just does exactly the opposite, interestingly enough. So we can see it in our body. We can see how it's fueling it when we're like, oh, go away, anxiety, go away. And then it starts, we have more and more suffering. We're experiencing more and more suffering. And then we can go, okay, maybe I'll just embrace it and go, I'll be anxious from now on till the end of my life, till the last breath, and I'll be okay with it. I'll be sad, I'll be experiencing this grief till the end of my life. Can I actually do this? And we see that the moment we stop trying for it to go away, interestingly enough, it starts fading away. And perhaps then it starts going back up like, we have no control over it. And once again, that's an experience. That's a learning experience. So I love the Tibetan word for meditation in Tibetan that is gone. That means familiarizing yourself with the mind. So we become familiar instead of this mess that we have no idea. We're like, oh, I want to meditate. I'm here in my room and I want to delight in this solitude and this great opportunity. In reality, I'm a big mess. It's because we have no idea what the mind is like. We're not familiar with it. And we think that meditation practice is supposed to be anapanasati or whatever we think it is, perhaps the Mahasi method. I don't know, whatever kind of method we've learned, then we have this preconceived idea of what it's supposed to be. Sometimes we actually have this idea that there shouldn't be no thinking whatsoever. But then in the suttas, actually, you read many times practitioners who, actually the Buddha himself, but also practitioners, monks who go to the Buddha and talk about how as they were dwelling alone, this thought appeared in the mind. Or they reflect on suffering, so they contemplate. So there's a skillful way to use the thought in understanding reality and familiarizing ourselves with the workings of the mind. So all of this work needs to be done. So forget about, oh, now I delight in solitude. Once again, as the Buddha pointed out earlier, it's not about just being alone in a room practicing meditation, but rather it's, once again, becoming familiar with the mind and starting to train the mind. So then that it doesn't go randomly. We normally go about life just fueling what doesn't need to be fueled and eliminating what needs to be eliminated. But when we are Dharma practitioners, we have instructions. So we follow those instructions of what needs to be nurtured and what needs to be removed. But in order to understand what needs to be nurtured and what needs to be removed in the first place, we need to understand what has grown, what is there, and what is, barren land, so to speak. You need to go outside and look at the garden. If I want to, if I want to grow grass, for example, I don't just go and like get some seeds and like grow grass, and then before going out and seeing that actually there's only grass here in West Orange, why would I grow more grass if there's like a lot of grass there? Right? I would go, oh, okay, actually there's grass already. I want to grow spinach and there's no spinach. So, okay, now let me go and grow the spinach. But I have to first see what is there to begin with, if you understand what I'm trying to say. I hope this answers your question. If not, feel free to ask more.
And Kausa friend asks, did the Buddha not also emphasize the value of good friends?
Absolutely, which is why in the sutta that I shared beforehand, he talks about, well, he says, he highlights to the elder bhikkhu how, yeah, we can talk about being alone or delighting in solitude in a literal way. But fundamentally, it is a means to an end. And fundamentally, being alone is being alone of greed, hatred, and delusion. And so how do we practice in that way? Actually, we're about to enter a 2-month retreat here at Empty Cloud, as I mentioned. And we will be all alone together. And a lot of the time, actually, here, we're alone together. So that's the power of spiritual friends. It's being surrounded by people who have the same objective in the path. So then we are all supportive of one another. And that is what creates ideal conditions to pursue awakening. Alone together.
Canut's question is related. So Sangha is super important to me, but it's so hard finding the balance between being alone and getting support. How does one find the balance?
Being alone and getting support.
Mm-hmm.
Can you clarify, I mean, what is exactly your struggle? I mean, you don't need to name names, but what exactly are you experiencing in terms of struggle? Because once again, I don't see it necessarily that you need to even find a balance fundamentally. That's what I'm trying to. That's why I guess confuses me a little bit. As I shared here, we're all alone together. So I guess maybe that's the balance in the way that we are living in community. And there's different ways. I guess one needs to also see the conditions of the mind, what is supportive. So in the end, the Buddha always tells us, reminds us that we need to evaluate the mind. Whatever kind of choice we make in life, we need to look at the consequences in the mind. And basically the questions to ask are my defilements diminishing? And are wholesome mind states increasing? And so if wholesome mind states are increasing, then whatever we're doing is good and we should keep on doing what we're doing. And if wholesome mind states are decreasing, hence unwholesome mind states are increasing, then we need to alter things a little bit. So perhaps the community or the people that you have around need to be shifted a little bit. The conditions need to be shifted, or maybe you need to spend more time by yourself and practice. And, there's never like a kind of straight cut answer, but it really depends on your particular conditions. And you're the one who needs to, once again, familiarize yourself with your mind and assess the choices and the consequences of your choices, and then shift and alter and assess once again. And then you see, I mean, if you're honest with yourself, which Canute, I know you do, you are very direct. So you can be direct with yourself, and it's not like, something to feel bad about, but rather just being frank, going, oh, okay, well, this is not really going well. Okay, how do I fix it? Very simple. No, like, bad person, that doesn't go well. Just being literal, just looking at it. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up.
And Denise says, I've had the opposite experience. I've lived by myself for more than a decade and found myself having to quarantine with my 89-year-old mother. It's been so difficult to share my space and change my lifestyle to accommodate her. I want my solitude back and feel awful about it because she's my mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. This is, well, first of all, rejoice in your own goodness of taking care of your mom, especially in these times, and that I'm sure she's very happy that you're there with her. And also be gentle with yourself in terms of like, yeah, of course, it's difficult. Here we live in community at the monastery, and we're all relatively happy, I hope, to live with one another. But it's also, relatively annoying to live with one another. I'm pretty sure I annoy each one of my companions. There's Mate Sundasa that is nodding. In so many different ways, and they annoy me too. I love you guys, but yes, and they all annoy me to one degree or another. It's just part of being together, as we like to say in Buddhism. We're basically we're in monastic circles. I don't know where I picked this up, but fundamentally we are like stones thrown in a tumbler, and then you activate the tumbler and all the stones bang one with the other, and we smooth each other out, and you get these nice levigated stones once you open the tumbler. But the process is intense, and there's a lot of noise and bangs, and it's like, whoa, that stone hit me hard, and it's difficult. That's why we live in community, why we are alone but together. The most common of stories are of monastics or lay practitioners as well, who just disappear in the middle of nowhere for years and years and years, and they come out all blissed out, rejoicing in solitude. And then they meet one person on the street, and the first person that says something mildly annoying, and bam, all their bliss, see you later, like disappears. Something slightly annoying that we disagree with, and that's because we've practiced abstinence rather than renunciation, rather than letting go of our opinions and our views. So great, we spend all our time by ourselves. There's no one who disagrees with us. Unless we're like really crazy and we say one thing and then we disagree with ourselves. But normally, I agree with myself all the time. Unless I'm reading the suttas, then I disagree with myself. Which is why it's so great to have the Dharma. And, it's like, actually, what you thought was completely idiotic, Ayya Soma. Get it together. That's the only time I disagree with myself. But fundamentally, all of this, just being in community, different people thinking just something banal as, where like a kitchen tool should be stored. And you're used to keeping it stored there over and over again, and then it disappears, and then you don't know where it is. And then you're like, when I was alone, everything was nice and ordered, neat, so easy. So yeah, it's just human, and it's part of the practice. And we just work on whatever we need to work in that moment. So once again, delighting in solitude is not just being alone, physically alone, but rather not longing, not craving for anything to be different than what it is. So if you're alone, physically alone, you're okay being physically alone. If you are not physically alone, that's great too. Whatever the conditions are, one is okay.
And Shadow of Label says, cool, thank you, Ayya. You're cool. And Mary, our friend, our neighbor, says, we'll miss you all while you're on retreat, but I appreciate that you'll still be virtual.
Yes, we will. I mean, we will be going on retreat, but there will always be one monastic each week taking care of the live streams. So you'll have some intensive monk weeks.
And Canute says, I see, alone is really about letting go of the fetters so that we
Sadhu.
can be comfortable with our respective selves.
Sadhu, see, I knew it, that you, very sharp Canute.
Canute also says, I am an extrovert, and I find that I get energized by being around people and find being alone difficult.
Yeah. I mean, we're all extroverts and we're all introverts. So once again, delight comes to one who is miserable, misery to one filled with delight. So it doesn't really matter whether we are extroverts or introverts or whatever it is. People think that I'm an extrovert, for example. I think of myself as an introvert, and there's like times that it's been the other way around, and it's just labels. But realistically, whenever we are craving one thing or the other, perhaps, when I got into Buddhism, I would define myself as an introvert, or I still think of myself as an introvert, but I'm still craving to be by myself. So then I suffer when I'm surrounded by people, which is no different than the other way around. So once again, not being too obsessed with the physicality of it all, but rather just working on eradicating craving, desire. That's the cause of suffering fundamentally. It's not whether we have people around or we don't have people around. The problem is craving.
And Shadow of Label asks an unrelated question. Is there a way to deal with dry mouth when breathing during meditation for a long time?
Dry mouth with breathing. This is a great question for monk chat. I think we can save it for monk chat on Friday, which will still be happening on January 1st. Is that right?
2021.
2021, hopefully. Although actually someone today mentioned that 2021, as in winning.
Hopefully that's not.
Hopefully not.
2021
but anyway, I got everybody depressed here. It's 2021. It was not my creation.
That seems to be it for the questions on YouTube. Not sure if there are any on Facebook.
All right. Okay, great. So we can end the evening then, and we will be meeting again tomorrow for Sutta study, and tomorrow evening with Bhante Sudato. That will be doing something for the end of the year, which will probably be a great Amma talk. And then on Friday morning, I was told that we are doing something about the beginning of the new year. Hopefully you will be better than the old. I don't know. Hopefully I'll say something more inspiring than that. And then monk chat on Friday.
So thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Always good to see you. And hopefully you'll be back tomorrow morning. If not, then in the evening tomorrow as well. So we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.